Stephen Austin. On and off for about 30 years now.
Okay.
Started when I was about 9 years old with the Boy Scouts. And that came from a rock climbing trip where you could cave in the wintertime, but you couldn't rock climb in the wintertime. People use caves today for education, conservation, and exploration. Basically, we educate the public about the unique ecosystems within. We educate them as to how they can help their neighbor down the road, especially here in Kentucky where wells are prevalent and septic tanks are prevalent. You definitely don't want to dump chemicals, farm chemicals and stuff down into sinkholes because they eventually wind up going downstream and interfering with their neighbor's water supply. Conservation piece happens to be with lots of the formations that are inside that take hundreds and even thousands of years to form. There's some endangered species of bats that we want to help protect that use caves as they're hibernating and basically their homes, and explore. It comes back to Christopher Columbus and Neil Armstrong. You definitely want to forefront the frontier and go somewhere where no man's ever been before. So caves have been used for, I would say, a plethora of things in the past. Water is one of them. As long as the cave is active with a water stream below. The cave behind me here, the farmer used to use the water for one, themselves, and two, to water their cattle. But caves have been used to help the fight against oppression. The War of 1812, we mined nitrate out of the ground in caves to help make gunpowder. So owning a cave back in the pioneer days was a pretty good thing. At least it led to an economic value. Of course, there are commercial caves today where states and private companies, even the federal government, have acquired caves to educate and show people what a cave environment looks like.
Okay.
The reason why caves are somewhat protected as far as the location, finding them on the internet or in maps, is basically under the conservation piece. Landowner liability has to do with some of it, and then local caving organizations educating those landowners, and even the legislatures or the councilmen in the counties that there are certain endangered species of bats we're trying to protect. We try to maintain the safety first piece, trying to protect the ecosystem that lays below. Some of them are very fragile. Some of the organisms that are down below are very susceptible to slight changes. But I would have to say the biggest one has got to be with landowner liability causes. People in the past just didn't realize what kind of impact they were putting on a cave when they broke those stalagmites and stalactites off. A lot of people have a conception that when they bring it out, it's going to be just as pretty as it was when it was inside the cave. And when you contrast the different colors of gray and brown and black inside a cave with white, it looks really pretty. But when you bring that white calcite formation up to the top, now it's competing with greens and blues and yellows. So it's not as pretty as it was, but if we would have left it there to begin with, it would have definitely maintained its aesthetic value to the cave. Historical graffiti inside a cave would be anything that's there before we ever got there, before we go in. We definitely try to educate the public that it's not a place to leave your everlasting signature. Mammoth has got some sections in it that have definitely got some historical significance behind it. And again, once it stopped, it was one of those things where everything before that was considered historical. Everything after that's considered vandalism. Caving gear has changed quite a bit throughout history. When I first started caving, the carbide lights were very similar to what the miners used. Hard hat helmets were very much like construction workers. Even before then, before helmets came into play, people were caving without a helmet and using torches. There are some caves that we explore and we've discovered where you see Native Americans walking through, and I can only imagine those guys barefoot and loincloth carrying river torches with them as their light source. However, for instance, the helmet that I have here is a hard hat helmet, which has two sources of light mounted onto it. And in a caver's safety rig, we carry three sources of light. The carbide light being very similar to what they had in the past, however, a newer version where a generator is held off the base around my hip belt, my waistline. And the gas comes through the tube and, of course, makes an acetylene flame that looks really nice inside the cave. This light that I have off to the side is a high bright beam Surefire in case I'm trying to look down a passage that we may be exploring or trying to push to see if it even goes anywhere. In the top of my helmet, I carry a trash bag. A lot of people think, why would you carry one? But it's a great way to spend the night warm. If something were to happen and you needed to stay inside a cave, it helps trap some body moisture in. It traps a little bit of heat. Plus, you can throw your dirty cave clothes in there when you get ready to go home if you need to. Of course, knee pads. A lot of people didn't use knee pads in the past, and some people even buy them and wear them on the external side. But as my coveralls are, I have built-in pockets for my knee pads, so they slide down inside. Boots. You want your feet well protected, ankle support, that kind of stuff. We carry a little pack that inside of it would have a waterproof bag is what I make sure that my food doesn't get wet, and generally determine depending on what type of trip I'm going on and how long. I may carry hot soup with me in a thermos, some water, of course, candy bars, granola, bubble gum, stuff like that to kind of wet the whistle. And then, of course, I carry gloves. You also want to have elbow pads if that's your thing. There are some passages you definitely want to make sure that you're well protected in. Of course, before you ever go caving, you want to file a plan with someone above ground. Let them know when you're going in, when you expect to be out. And if you have an idea of where you're going, that way if something were to happen, they can notify the local authorities. It's a lot of interesting stories in caving. I think there's been quite a few, but I think some of the two that stand out in most recent history for me or most recent memory, the cave directly behind us was surveyed in the late 60s. Some notes had showed that there were some small holes that were blowing some cold air. Nobody ever went back to look at them. Myself and a couple of others worked on that cave or those little passages, and they ended up yielding quite a bit of nice passage left in the cave. There's some uniqueness to this. It's heading to another cave that we discovered here a year ago last August. It was by a landowner calling us and saying that he had a hole in the ground. And if you had a dime for every time someone told you they had a hole in the ground, you'd be a rich man. But we went out and we checked it out. We were able to open it up after a little bit of work. And it's obviously going to be the largest and longest cave in Hardin County. When we first went in, it was the sheer excitement of being the first in something like that. It's a very nice, large passage cave, unique in its own right. But it was the second or third time that we had gone in a cave when we started noticing marks on the wall that weren't unique to any of us. There was no graffiti whatsoever. So to find arrows with starbursts and some chiseled hieroglyphics, if you want to call them, or petroglyphs, the stoke marks and the chiseling on the walls where the Indians, or these people, I should say, were taking the gypsum off the walls for their medicinal or ceremonial purposes, what we speculate it would be. That became very unique. So I guess that's probably the most unique, to think you're the first, but then to find out, well, maybe the first in 2,500 to 3,900 years ago is what our carbon dating had told us. but nevertheless unique in its own right. It's drawn quite a bit of attention in the caving community.